Did you know that over 63% of cyber breaches are caused by a third-party vendor? CyberGRX is on a mission to modernize third-party cyber risk management. Built on the market's first third-party cyber risk exchange, CyberGRX arms you with fast and accurate data, a proven and innovative approach, so you can make rapid, informed decisions and confidently engage with partners. Learn how partnering with CyberGRX will help you become cyber certain. Visit securityweekly.com/CyberGRX. RSA offers business-driven security solutions that provide organizations with a unified approach to managing digital risk and designed to effectively detect and respond to advanced attacks, manage user access control, and reduce business risk, fraud, and cybercrime. For a limited time, get mobile multi-factor authentication from RSA Secure ID Access for free to help secure your remote or dynamic workforce long-term. Leverage push notification, biometric, and one-time password authenticators to secure access to your cloud applications, on-premises systems, legacy systems, privileged accounts, and more at no cost for 6 months. For more information, visit securityweekly.com/RSA Security. Are you struggling to reduce your cybersecurity risks and meet compliance mandates? Wishing you could be proactive instead of reactive? You need a solution that integrates cybersecurity together to make it affordable, accessible from anywhere, and simplistic, so you can gain a return on investment on your resources. Cyrisma is your answer. It gives you a single interface to identify sensitive data, vulnerable systems, insecure configurations, track progress, and assign accountability. Visit securityweekly.com/Cyrisma today for a 7-day test drive and impress your leadership. That's Cyrisma, CYRISMA.
All right, welcome back to Security and Compliance Weekly, where we've been talking to Liam Downward, or really he's been talking to us and asking us questions about data. Before we jump back into the conversation, do have a couple announcements. Join Amit Barakat, the co-founder and CEO of Perimeter 81, and our very own Paul Asadorian for a technical deep dive into the problems inherent in legacy VPN technology. Together, they will explore solutions for the modern workforce and how momentum toward perimeterless architecture wait a minute, I need a drink. Okay. Perimeterless architecture is helping redefine the future of cybersecurity. Register now by visiting securityweekly.com/perimeter81. Also, would you like to have all of your favorite Security Weekly content at your fingertips? Do you want to hear from Sam and Andrea when we have upcoming webcasts and technical trainings? Do you have a question for one of our illustrious hosts? And Josh. Someone from the Security Weekly team, or wish you could hang out with the Security Weekly and community? Subscribe on your favorite podcast catcher, sign up for our mailing list, and join our Discord server to stay in the loop on all things Security Weekly. You can start by going to securityweekly.com/subscribe. All right, we're going to get back into it. Let me kick this off with a comment or two that hopefully leads to a question, Liam. You had given an illustration right before the break, which I've never heard of, but that's okay. But I wanted to focus a little bit further back when you were commenting on, people not thinking that if it's written down and it's hard copy, paper copy, that, you need to worry about things from a PCI perspective. It reminded me, I was thinking about this on the break, that back when I got started in my career I was working for the Department of the Navy at the time at a research organization. All the sensitive data back in those days was hard copy, and the way that it was kept secure, it was locked in a safe. And the thought that I had on the break was, that was sort of the beginning of the mentality of, we've got sensitive data and we have a solution that protects it. We don't have to think about it. So lock it in the safe, make sure it's locked. We're done. And we don't have to worry about it. Although, and I tell this story in some of the talks that I give, just sort of my introduction into information or cybersecurity, as we now call it, was I had a summer intern job. I was actually paid. It wasn't an intern job. summer temp job working for this Navy department, and my job was to go through this safe that this physicist had all sorts of research material that he had collected over the years, and he wanted me to catalog it and build a. He had gotten some money, so he had bought a desktop PC. It was like a, one of the old TRS whatevers. Didn't even have a hard drive. You loaded the operating system, and you had a choice. Anyway. He had a DBase 2 program he bought, and he wanted me to build a database and catalog everything that was in the safe. Well, my introduction to security was I left the safe unlocked one night, and I got reamed for it because I violated all sorts of, deeply found cultural fundamental principles of lock the damn safe at night when you go home. And I was a kid in college, is like, what's the big deal? And I said, I work in an organization that's in a building, that's on a campus, that's surrounded by fences, armed guards drive around, there's barbed wire on top of the fences. To get into the building, you got to get past a security checkpoint, a guard desk. You've got guards roaming the halls. I'm working in an office where the door's locked, and then you have a safe. Who's ever going to get to the safe? Why is it that's such a big deal? Now that spins off all sorts of stories and lessons learned, but what I want to focus on is two things. One is from the very beginning, we've had this perception that all you have to do is buy something, and we're done. We don't have to think about it, and we've replaced the safe for the machine that goes ping, or the machine with the blinky lights. One of the things that I've thought about over the years, though, in terms of data classification, which you brought up, which we don't really do well in the commercial world, is focus on data classification from the perspective of life expectancy. Now, the analogy that I give very often, because I have a DoD background, military background, is if you're on a battlefield and you want to call in an airstrike on your enemy position, and so you're calling back to the base, and in the old days it'd be a bomber that would come in. Nowadays they're going to fly a drone in, but you're giving them GPS coordinates, you're giving them latitude, longitude, grid coordinates of where to drop the bombs. That information is extremely sensitive for about 10 minutes until the bomb drops, and they either dropped it in the right place or not. And then it doesn't really matter. That's an extreme example, but in a PCI context, for example, when several years ago we went through the exercise collectively of let's discover where all your data is in your organization, because nobody ever thought to do that apparently, and lo and behold, organizations were finding out that credit card information was everywhere, electronically, physically. The accounting department had it, the marketing department had it, accounts receivable, accounts payable, fraud detection, fraud prevention. The IT department, the network devices, they all had promiscuous logging turned on, so all the transactions that were transmitting were being captured. It was everywhere. And because companies were told, well, if you segment your environment, you only have to do PCI for this subset, they got all on the bandwagon of let's reduce scope. But in order to claim that, they had to go through an exercise of discovery to make sure that they had identified where it was and then pull it all into their card data environment, their CDE. Now, that was their motive, which you could argue whether it was a good motive or not. The lesson learned for many of my customers, at least, was when they found that the data was everywhere and they went through the cleanup process, one thing that they discovered more often than not was, we've got all the credit card information in all these different places, but we don't actually use it, sort of like your social security number example, that was off the end of the spreadsheet. We don't use it. We don't need it. Why are we even keeping it in the first place? So many of my companies, in order to reduce their footprint, they eliminated all the one-offs, but then they found out, well, we don't really need to keep the credit card information at all. And if we get rid of it, magically we don't have to do PCI as much, and therefore all that pain goes away.
Jeff, I want to piggyback on that for a second.
Sure. Go ahead.
What I find interesting is you find all these companies, and I agree with you, we find them all the time. They've got this data. They're like, why do we have this data? What are we doing with it, right? And then they
Right.
realize the interesting thing about this is that they're holding data, which is a liability for which they're not getting paid to take that risk. And I think the concept that data is the fuel for business, but it is also a liability when you start talking about sensitive data, because it's a liability in that you've got to pay money to protect it, you've got to pay money to monitor it, you've got to pay money to do all the things around it, if you will. And if you're not getting paid to hold that liability, why are you doing it?
Because organizations are hoarders. Right?
Well, that's
They have
true.
a hoarder syndrome. They just keep anything as possible as long as possible, because one is, if you look at the retention schedule, right? And let me just take a few steps back before even getting to a retention policy or retention aspect. People need to know or understand the data that they have, right? How many organizations that you've worked with or have engaged with have actually performed an actual true data classification tabletop, where you sit down each individual department and say, okay, what type of data do you actually access, right? Which is, let them feel they understand what we access. We got first name, last name, we take date of birth, we take this information, take that information. Okay. And I'm just going to keep it simplified here. We have public and we have sensitive, right? Here's what we've defined as sensitive data, which can include intellectual property and all the rest of the stuff, and all the stuff that's being bound by regulatory compliance or state-driven. And then you have public domain that you can just do a quick Google search and you can find telephone numbers and everybody's home address, right? Now, when you work with that, now you're on the honor system, right? It's going back to saying, yeah, I think it's in this location, it's in that location, it's in this location, it's in this database. Most organizations leave it at that. They accept that, and then they walk on and says, hey, we've done it. Here's our data classification. We've done our due diligence, and we think this data is in A, B, and C. Not knowing that it's in D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, all the way through the rest of the thing, and then beyond, like an Excel spreadsheet, right? It keeps going to like triple Z, whatever. They don't know where their data is, right? They really don't. The problem we have is then, do we bring in technology, or do you look and say, okay, let's take a step back and look at a business purpose? What kind of data do we really need in order to us function as a business? And can we control that before we make a determination whether we want to store it? And if you do store it, then let's go into retention policy process of how we keep it. Because like if you look at healthcare has this huge retention schedule. They have to, from a compliance standpoint, they have to keep the person's alive, they have to keep that medical record forever. And then if the person passes away, you got to keep it for a number of years after the person's passed away, that kind of thing. And a lot of things are in place. But how is an organization going to do that if, you know what I mean? So I'm trying to get to the point where if a lot of organizations see issues, they know it, but they don't have the construct or the expertise or knowledge that'll guide them, guide them through the path of understanding the data, discovering it, compartmentalizing it, and defining whether I need it for business. And then do I rely on technology to basically, in a way, kind of check on the honor system? Are the people telling me exactly the truth of, hey, is it in A, B, and C? And if it is, that's great. We can control it. But if it's not in D, E, F, and G, and the rest of it, then what do we do? Because then it means it broadens the scope, because then it goes back to what you were saying, Jeff, is people then, it's not over here, but then this is my PCI environment. But then I have all this other area that potentially could have reconciliation, which could have credit card information in it, but they don't think about it because it's not part of the payment network. So therefore it's not included. But then you got all this data. So it's kind of like a bit of a hodgepodge mismatch of a lot of things. And we see that a lot in our organizations and that's when they throw their hands up and say, you know what, enough is enough. We'll just continue on doing what we're doing. I know there's a lot of things that are stated in that.
But what you're pointing out is that for companies to have a data classification program, they need to have policies and procedures behind that to be able to capitalize on the effort, right? So there's a certain set of companies that can do that, and then there's other companies that don't care about it, right? So what do you do? What do you say to the companies that don't care about it?
Well, and in conjunction with that, as you're answering that, Liam, I also want to add that there has been some dissent on the Discord where someone's disagreeing with what you were saying earlier. And I will quote I plead the fifth of whiskey. People are data hogs. It's because nobody knows what you have to see, so they keep stuff forever. It's ignorance, not anything else. Go.
Well, it is, but it's tradition as well. Look, Jeff, you mentioned that in the beginning of your career, when the dinosaurs were around, that it was all paper and locked up in safes. Sorry?
It was before that.
Before the dinosaurs. We're talking single cell organisms, or even before that.
Yeah,
so anyway,
there's data somewhere on that. I just don't know where it is.
Well, it's probably
it's in your DNA.
Because back in those days, we got rid of data when we were done with it because the paper expanded exponentially and the file cabinets got too much. And it's like, all right, just throw out, 10 years ago or whatever. And nowadays, but then starting, 20 years ago, it was, we can use this data, or 10 years ago, whatever it is, we can use this data. So it was more along the lines of just keep collecting the data because we'll start putting it in data lakes and everybody will use it. And data is amazing. And we're going to use data for everything. And it's awesome. Just collect it all, collect it all, collect it all. And now I think what we're starting to see is the beginning of the curated data set, where this is the data I need to do my business. This is the data I can hold if somebody wants to pay me extra for whatever reason. And this is data I don't need. And why am I holding on to it? Because again, it's a liability. Mm-hmm. So I think we're starting to see but it's very, very new. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying this is common. We're starting to see the realm, and your company, Liam, is part of this movement towards, okay, now I had no idea we had this much data. What do we actually need? And being thoughtful about it and planning it out and thinking about what data do I actually need? What data can I use? What data could I use? What data should I use? And what data should I get the heck rid of? Okay.
Yeah. And that brings back an accountability, right? That's the biggest thing. Sorry, I didn't mean to step on you there.
No. Go ahead. Expand, please. Go for it.
So accountability, right? So again, selfish plug about Cyrisma, right? I'm here. That's because we're Cyrisma. So, but the one thing that we wanted to do is in that solution is to, okay, we find the data, right? We classify it for you and say, okay, you've got Social Security, you got this, got that, the whole 9 yards. But how many organizations automatically presume that that's IT's job or information security to reduce that footprint? Well, it's not, because 9 times out of 10, when they go say they're going to do it, what are they doing? They're on the phone talking to the data owner. Do you want this file? Do you want this data? Do you want this? And then in the back of their mind, like, why am I doing this? This should be them doing that. So we've seen a lot of positive approach from people utilizing our tool, is that now, if you're an InfoSec manager or you're within IT and you've got through all of it, security, as soon as I find sensitive data, it's on the hands of the actual data owner to actually remove. And it goes through what you just said there, Josh, in the sense of, okay, do I really need that data? And why do I need it? And if I do need it, let's provide a justification, because then that justification then can be used as an audit function to say, okay, on this day, Liam, you said that you needed that data and you need it for this reason. So that means in 6 months, we can then go back, check and say, okay, is that data still existing? Because you stated that you did not need to have that data longer than X. So now there's a level of accountability, which I think a lot of entities are like you said earlier, are adopting, and they're seeing the benefit of it, because, and then what happens is they're like, well, whoa, hang on a second. I've got 10 years of data I got to go through. But yeah, well, that's not my fault. That's actually your fault, right? That you've actually created this 10 years worth of hoarding, and you're making yourself little paths to walk around the rubble that you've got. But now they're starting to look
I got it. You got to do a Marie Kondo. You got to ask, does this data give you joy?
I'm going to hit you so hard.
So I want to step in. I want to step in here. Liam, you bring up a really great point, and that's around.
Go ahead, Scott.
That's around data culpability, right? And John, you've been extremely quiet this past episode, and I want to throw this at you. When dealing with data culpability and being defined as a data custodian inside of a business, what is the legal ramification for a data custodian really fucking it up?
Okay, so thanks for that fastball right down the middle. If you have the data,
knuckleball.
If you are in possession, custody, control of the data, and there's a lawsuit, and that data has something to do with the underlying lawsuit, or it might, then you're responsible for searching it and potentially producing relevant data. So when you hoard data, you create potential legal burdens big time.
Okay, and that can that hoarding of data come from a juxtaposition on what to do with it, how to make a decision around it, how to move it, how to transfer? Can you walk through that, please?
Sure. Well, you start with, in my opinion, a data policy, and then you stick with it. Sit down and decide what data is worth the cost of keeping, right? All data that you keep comes at a cost. You got to store it, you got to protect it, you have to produce it, perhaps. It may contain evidence of stuff that won't make you look good in court. That's a potential cost that's baked into keeping that data around. Then on the other hand, there's benefits of data, right? Like we're finding ways all the time to look at massive amounts of data and derive value from it.
Right.
Oil, data is the oil, right? So, that's the supply,
Mm-hmm.
the trade-off. And by the way, how about this one? Zoom data. How many companies are storing your Zoom data? Interesting question, right?
Yeah. Yep.
That's called China, and they're not a company; they're a country. How would you brought something up really important, John? Dealing with the policies. How would you identify a data custodian and then make them culpable towards I want to use such a bad word here, transmogrification of data inside of the business?
Calvin and Hobbes, baby.
I think I understood some of the words that you just said. But
transformation, transmogrification equals transformation from one entity to another.
Man, you got to get up on your Calvin and Hobbes, man.
Well, okay, so I'll just add this. There's been a push and pull among lawyers for 20 years, ever since I've been practicing, about the business people want to keep everything because they never know what's going to be useful, and the lawyers want to get rid of everything because, God forbid, we get sued and then I'm going to have to produce this. I feel like the center of gravity is moving more toward save everything, just as storage costs have come down. And shameless plug, but you did ask. Agnes Intelligence has a product that searches and reviews data at massive volumes, including audio, video data, and we think just
right.
Just,
but does it classify data though? Can it go
sure
through
does.
and tag and bag
Yeah.
data and make that data relevant to the custodian themselves? Right. I don't care about searching across it. I'm talking about relevancy to the custodian.
Oh, well, I'm sure we could. I'd have to dig into the use case a little bit more, but that sounds like what we can do.
Okay. Jeff, Josh, Liam.
Well, I had a question for Liam. You, I guess in the tagline for today's show on the show notes, I'm assuming it came from you. I guess I shouldn't make that assumption necessarily. But the statement was made, in quotes, you've scanned your data to uncover risks and vulnerabilities and assigned accountability through mitigation plans to meet compliance mandates. Now you must classify, rank, prioritize, and score your data to track efforts and stay organized. That was an intriguing statement to me because, again, from a PCI perspective, I'd say PCI isn't making you do that. That's not a compliance mandate. I'm pointing up because I have words above my little picture. I'm a nerd. PCI doesn't make you uncover risks and vulnerabilities associated with data specifically. It's sort of an implied thing. So my first question is, what compliance mandates are you aware of that have you do this activity? Second question is, why in the world would you classify, rank, and prioritize and score your data to track efforts and stay organized? What's the motivation there? And really, my question is, to the point, how does Cyrisma help a company? First, I guess, categorize or classify data, and I assume you do that first before you go out and find it and discover it. Do you start with a template? Do you have them fill out a questionnaire and say, what kind of data do you care about? What do you do? What do you do?
What do we do? Okay. So getting back to your question about compliance mandates. So like, for example, I'll just use PCI, making sure that you don't have credit cards stored in other places besides what's in scope, right? Making sure if you are storing in database, make sure that it's encrypted if it is in a database and so forth. And if it's stored in an Excel file and you got credit cards in there, that shouldn't, you shouldn't keep that out there because it's outside of that system. But from a HIPAA perspective, they're looking, everything should be inside of an EMR, right? If you do take stuff out of the EMR, it needs to be looked at and kept.
Wait. Time out. Yeah. EMR, break that down.
Electronic medical record system. So, so you have it. Yeah. So you call it EA. You can call it an EHR, electronic health record, electronic medical record. You can call it EPHI, electronic protected health information. There's all different acronyms out there, right? So, and they want you to keep it within the system. So you have meaningful use coming out. You've got high trust, all these different elements out there that are added on to the HIPAA standard of saying about data itself. Because a lot of times people will download reports, right? You'll see that one of the breach reports where I'm located, a nice medical entity, a doctor plugged in a USB and downloaded a lot of patient health information and lost it on a USB drive. And these are the things that we're doing because it's easy to access information and just store it everywhere, but you need to have it in a and know where it is so you can actually correct that wrongdoing, right? So if somebody stores something on a laptop, you don't really want that laptop to be leaving the entity, but you don't really want it on that laptop. Yes, it's encrypted. That's if only somebody steals the laptop, they can't get access to it or take the hard drive out of it. But if you turn it on, you log in successfully, that data is still now in clear text because somebody else can connect to it, or you can have a remote exploit, all this kind of stuff. But so now let's talk about what we do. We actually have templates already built into the system to say, okay, look for credit cards, social security numbers, driver's license, ICD-10, medical, drug names, all the major things out there, financial information, EIN numbers, and then we start getting into GDPR and the Consumer Protection Act, where we look for GPS coordinates. We look for all the other elements around, personal health, personal information, PII, from address, email address, date of birth, to, I hate to even say this, we have VIN numbers as well, because if you're an entity, hackers actually go after VIN numbers, especially if you have a fleet, and they can sell that to chop shops because then they can print out VIN numbers and so forth. So if you actually have a fleet, we actually have people look for VIN numbers that they have within their system. So that's part of what we call organizational stuff, UNC paths, IP addresses. So we have about 60 plus different types of templates that they can go and scan for. And once we identify that, we classify it, we give them the context, and then what they can do at that point is then create the mitigation, assign it to a data owner, and then give them a time span to actually mitigate the risks. And then inside that, within the mitigation, what we do is we'll tell them they can either delete the file, they can encrypt the file, they can move it to a secure location or like a quarantine because they don't know exactly what they want to do with that file yet. Or they can mark it as a false positive or they could say, we're going to take no action. But every item that they do, they need to provide a justification that is of 50 characters or more. And they can't just put in some simple word, need to encrypt, and that's it. They need the reason why, because we use that as business purposes from an auditing standpoint. If something ever happens, then there's liability coverage around that because we actually attempted to mitigate that. And here's the reason, so we can push some accountability down to the end user, in this case, the data owner. And then the data owner has the functionality to create an additional workflow, and that is then to assign the people in their department action items out of the mitigation that's provided to them.
What you're touching on is something that we're seeing in the Discord. Jim Gilson, good friend of ours, great and really strange esoteric compliance, wonderful guy.
Yep.
He says this is somewhat of a racy chart discussion. Eventually, the data owner is the one that's accountable for it. They may offload the responsibility for maintaining the security of that data to another organization, yours or another third party.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. So that's where you're headed, right?
Yeah. So that's exactly the ownership goes to the data owner to mitigate it, and they actually have the ability to remove permissions, not add, because they may discover that IT or security that has access control may put everyone in there, but they've got 20 other people listed, and everyone has full control. Now the data owner has the responsibility to say, "No, hang on a second, let me think about that. Everyone shouldn't have access to it. Let me go and remove it." And then our software will actually perform that function, go and connect to that file and remove the everyone directly from the ACL on that file, whether it's on a SAN, if it's on a file server and so forth, and remove
the access control list. Yep.
You got it. And then we give them, because we've had comments come back to us, well, why are you giving us encryption? Our SAN is encrypted. I said, well, that's great if somebody breaks into your data center and starts, basically decides to get a crowbar and take out your Nimble, and you can see them running out the front door with a Nimble, big massive SAN in their hand, then yes, it's encrypted. But if you have a CIFS share and it's part of Active Directory or whatever directory driven for authentication mechanism you have, as soon as they connect to that CIFS share and they've successfully authenticated, that data is in clear text. It's not encrypted. So therefore, now you got to look at saying, okay, now I can actually do disk data at rest to be encrypted, and we provide that functionality at a file level, so they can actually decide whether they want to keep it encrypted with AES 256-bit encryption. But the reality is that it's not IT making that decision. It's not security administrators or SOC or whatever analysts you want to call them, or the security manager or the CISO making the decision. It has to be the data owner, because they're ultimately one that created that data. They're the ultimately one that manages that data and uses it on a daily basis. So they need to be held accountable on how they actually reduce that footprint. And we'll go through the analogy is that every data has a cost now, right? And then whether you want to call it as dollars, cents, or you want to turn it into cryptocurrency, there's a cost associated with that data. So the more sensitive data you have and the potential of being compromised, we're going through now with some of the IR people that they will go through a ransomware process, and the ransomware will come up and will have no dollar, cents, or amount with it yet, because they're evaluating the data. In the other
so
end,
the question that we're getting are, does Cyrisma also inventory and track keys to the data? And I think this is a really good point to break in, Liam.
Keys in what sense? You talking about the encryption keys?
Yeah.
Yes, we do.
That's what I'm extrapolating.
Yeah,
DMZ,
so
can you clarify? You keep going.
Yeah. So let's take, if they want to go and encrypt the file, we actually create a passphrase based on the user's input. So if we have a passphrase kept on file in our software that's encrypted, we'll use that to encrypt it. And then the person doesn't have to be in our software to open it up. They can double click on it and it'll open up and ask for a password. We're in the process of looking at tying into Okta Duo for two-factor authentication as part of that process. But is it recoverable? Absolutely. The administrator can go in and actually recover the passphrase to gain access to that file if that person ever leaves or forgets it or is basically terminated.
Good. Valid.
Yeah,
okay.
So that was a nice plug about our software, but still data is a problem. So.
Well, and maybe you answered this because I was torn between Discord and listening to you. What did you say was the answer to, how do you start with what kind of data do you care about? What's the approach to, you mentioned, the obvious like PCI data and probably, I don't know, social security number, but to what degree do you delve into some of the murky waters that we've spent most of this segment talking about in terms of all the new types of data that are now sensitive and things that we should worry about, but haven't necessarily been defined by any compliance or regulatory standards yet, at least not adequately.
Yeah, so we've kind of analyzed and says, okay, what is what we call the quick hits, right? And the quick hits is, okay, we have things called the common scan options, right? And the common scan options are Social Security, credit card, driver's license, passport, passwords, and I think it's one other item. I can't remember off the top of my head. And then we break it down to financial, healthcare, PII, and then organizational, and then we have custom. Now, the reason why we put custom in is because we're not going to know every type of data set that's available, right? So in our software, we allow the entity to create two types. They can either, if they're very slick, they can create a regular expression for any type of data set that they want to look for, or they can strictly just create a simple keyword that we convert into a keyword-driven regular expression. That could be a sentence or an individual word. So we give those people the opportunity. And what we do in our essence is we look for insertion points, right? We look for various different variations to say, okay, we found a word of a DOB. It's not really date of birth unless there's something that follows on to the next line that has a date of birth associated with it. Because sometimes when we look at files, we look at an Excel file, we can look at a text file or CSV file, and the DOB may not be right next to the actual word in a couple of lines. It could be like 3 lines down because it's an actual they're trying to create a table. So we look at that and bring that into the equation. So we're not just strictly looking for dates, right? Because dates could be today or dates from 100 years ago. We're looking for a specific, what we call insertion points, where basically means is there's a word saying date of birth or DOB and different ways of variances of that, and then look for characteristics within a certain number of characters before and after, depending on what's being stated, so we can actually make a good determination to say, yep, this is definitely a date of birth, or this is definitely a social security number, or this is definitely a credit card. And we do actually Lund testing and verification. A lot of them are now, like Social Security hasn't done that for a while now, because all bets are off, because you could literally tell where the person was born by their Social Security number, and that's no longer given. So now they've opened up other additional numbers associated with that. And then the same thing with NPI, National Provider Identifier, DEA. I didn't even know that every provider is given a DEA number. So if they actually are issuing out any type of narcotic-based drugs, then they have to have a DEA number associated with that. And then the DEA comes in and verifies and checks and all this kind of stuff that's going on. And I didn't know that until I started doing some of this data stuff. So you start diving into more of the data. That is a lot of stuff that you wouldn't even think that even exists or even included in, like GDPR is expanding each year of what elements that they want to include. You talk about tax information, your mortgage information, your lien of your house, your to GPS coordinates, metadata that you may have inside of a JPEG that could have GPS coordinates, but other types of metadata is also included. So it's expanding. And now you've got California taking on that realm as well, which is supposedly is a little stricter than GDPR when it comes to the consumer data. So there's a lot of things that we've built into that. So when the person is presented, they get the option to what they want to select and click on, and then they generate their own profile. They don't click on and says, "Hey, I want to look for healthcare." They can actually select and interchange and mix in.
Yeah, I'm curious, and this is sort of a two-part question. First part of the question is where and how do you decide where to look for the data? Do you have sort of the usual suspects of places that you like to look for data, whether it's file types or shared repositories, file shares, things like that. That's the first part of the question. The second part of the question is, assuming that you do have some sort of places that you like to look that are sort of fruitful, shall we say. Do you have any capability or option of going to some of those places and simply saying to the customer, "Hey, it's very common for sensitive data to be found in locations XYZ. We went and looked at your location XYZ, and here's all the different kind of stuff that we found. Is this anything that you care about? Is this anything that you consider to be sensitive?" So not declaring it sensitive at the outset and looking for specific things, but looking at the typical locations and seeing what's there, and then going back to the customer and saying, "Is this stuff that you care about? And do you care that it's here in this publicly available type space?"
Yes, there is. We work with, each organization or entity is different in how they present the data or it's shared on the network, right? We have sales, marketing, you have payroll or accounting, and you have human resources. The four key elements where there's a lot of sensitive data that's being stored. So when we work with them, we can define to say, okay, where are those located? Because we're not going to know, because you could have a folder somewhere on a server called, the sunshine is blue. When we've had weird names for shares, we're not going to know that that's sales data and doing that. So what we do is we actually perform a network discovery, right? So when they set up their first initial sensor on their network, we do a network discovery, which goes out and looks at targets, and we discover what we call data discovery points, which basically means as soon as we connect to an asset, we can determine, say, okay, here's all the local drives and here's all the shares that it has on that system. So when they go and set up and click on and say, I want to schedule a scan, they can just go boop, 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 select which target they want to go ahead and scan. And then we collectively decide, okay, we're going to go and scan that host based on the input from the user, and then provide them a feedback, and that's how it goes. And then they can actually, I didn't realize sales would have that. Well, we've mentioned that in the beginning of the setup to say, hey, sales is going to have some intellectual property, which could be financial information, could be internal pricing, whatever you want to set up. But you're not discovering it because that could be deemed as custom. So let's go ahead and help you create a custom review. They go and create a custom. Now go and scan that folder again, and now all of a sudden all that data is popping because now it's unique to them. Now we go to HR. That's where it goes back to retention, right? And same with accounting, where all of a sudden you have thousands upon thousands of social security numbers, 401k information that goes back 20 years. Do you really need that from a retention standpoint, to have 20 years worth of data that houses information at the same social security number that is repeated 19 times out of the 20? So they need to, then they don't aware, because it's just used to that compounding effect of just doing the same thing over and over again. And now that's what we have to discover. So one is we tell people to brace themselves, because you're going to find stuff that you thought was somewhere, and you're going to find stuff that's going to end up being somewhere that you didn't think was there. And then they're like, wow, I didn't know this. Wow, I didn't know that. And I'll go back to, a couple of years back with an entity, same thing. They had a access database that is spread across multiple machines that actually housed a lot of sensitive data that they didn't even know that they had. That was going back to an old program that they had almost, I think it was like from 2002. But they just kept, every time they migrated the PC, that same data kept going and going and going and going. And then they discovered it out on the majority of the machines, because the IT person decided to take an image of one of the machines and use that as the baseline and did a sysprep, but didn't clean out the data. Then it was just being deployed out. And that was a Windows 7 image, and it was just being deployed out for a number of years. And then they just keep repeating the whole process. So, and this was a large entity, and they didn't know. And that's the whole point. Now they're discovering stuff, because, I'm not going to put people out names wise and stuff like that. But when you have solutions out there that cost a lot of money, this is where we end up in a situation where people don't know their data. They see free space. They will use it until they'll abuse it until it's up and out of it. And then the first thing they'll do is, hey, we need more money. And the first thing they'll want to do is buy more SAN storage and expand that capacity. And then they just keep adding more and more and more. And then it's an oh crap moment when they get hit with either a breach or any type of element that was driven by a human error through an email or anything like that. And then it's kind of like, oh crap, what did we have in that data? And then they have to go to backups and restore it. And then they use our tool, and they find out, they're like, oh crap, we're going to have to do a declaration now, because we just discovered 100,000 social security numbers, and we just discovered 25,000 credit card numbers that may go back 5 years. They may have expired, but there's still credit card numbers that may get reused, or there's no CVV number. So there's all things that people go through, and it's an oh crap moment. It's the statement saying, what was your budget before the breach, right? Now it's kind of like people need to be proactive instead of reactive. And I think a lot of times people will throw up the tools, and like I was mentioning in the break about the glass tank, right? They'll put this glass tank with all the data in there and keep going, and all of a sudden things will start to happen. But instead of focusing on fixing and putting a better hardening inside that glass tank, they put all these ancillary solutions out in front of it to kind of bounce off all these attacks. When you've got all humans behind it, that your workers, they're the ones that are the biggest threat to your integrity of that data. And that's
wait. Are you saying glass fish tank? Because those have been used in a breach. Jeff?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
But that's the thing. It's that pebble. Someone needs to throw a pebble, and something will break, and then they'll stop blaming things rather than taking ownership and responsibility. That's where the accountability comes in. You go the confidentiality, integrity, availability, and then we add in the accountability, because if those three elements used to be okay on their own and working together in tandem, but now as we've grown and the data sprawl has gotten even bigger, there's no accountability, and we need to bring that in, and people need to take ownership. Amount of times I've seen people get away with stuff because of it, and the policies are not updated. They haven't written in stuff. They haven't assigned a risk level to the policy to say that if I've violated a certain policy, that should dictate what should happen to me, rather than leaving in discretionary control. And data is treated the same way, right? It's discretionary. It's not mandatory. Don't tell me what to do. I know how to do my job. You take care of IT. You do what I say, because you work for me, not the other way around, rather than working together for the business. And that's what you see it a lot of times.
All right. Scott, say something real quick so I can see your screen.
The counter for today, we are even between the times that people have said PCI and the times that you have said PCI. We are even for today.
Except
I get to close this out, and I'm gonna.
I want to close this out.
I'm gonna be the vice president and break the tie, I guess.
Okay.
Liam, thank you very much for joining us today. It was a pleasure, and really enjoyed the conversation. Discord has been blowing up as usual, and it's hard to split our time. So to our listening audience, if you're intrigued by what Liam is talking about and want to see what it's all about, you can go to securityweekly.com/Cyrisma. There's actually a very interesting sort of quiz that starts when you go to that page. I was hoping to get into that a little bit, but we just didn't get there. We had so much else going on, and we certainly weren't lacking for engaging conversation. So this podcast will be stored forever, and it becomes its own data set ultimately. Isn't that cool? Anyway, thank you for joining us today as we continue this journey of building bridges, tearing down silos. If you like what you hear, leave a comment below, smash the bell, hit the subscribe button, and join us next week on Security and Compliance Weekly.